The Duchess bowed to her husband's former mistress, and the orchestra forgot how to breathe. On the evening of May 18, 1843, every candle in the ballroom of Rivington House had been lit to honor the Redbourne widow's subscription. Crystal shone above 300 guests. White gloves lifted glasses. Jewels flashed beneath gilt mirrors. At the head of the receiving line stood Winifred Rivington, Duchess of Redbourne, who had spent 4 months designing every detail of the benefit, from the placement of the subscription tables to the quiet entrance reserved for widows who did not wish to be stared at as objects of pity. She had arranged the musicians, negotiated the supper, planned the carriage schedule, and placed every chair so that age or infirmity would not exclude a single invited woman. None of that labor appeared upon her face. Society saw only composure, pale silver silk, and the black fan she carried in one hand. Near its edge, one crescent of silver thread remained unfinished. The master of ceremonies lifted the opening night program and announced, "Lady Delphine Mallory, principal patroness, by the appointment of His Grace." A murmur passed through the room before the name had fully left his mouth. The orchestra held. The eastern doors opened. Lady Delphine entered in blue silk, wearing a silver-blue rosette above her heart. She did not look surprised. She walked with the measured calm of a woman arriving exactly where she had been promised a place. Winifred felt the ballroom change around her. Every guest knew Delphine had once been Nicholas's mistress. Every guest also knew the affair had ended before his engagement. Yet London had never required adultery to create scandal. It needed only memory, proximity, and a wife forced to smile. Delphine crossed the polished floor while 3 suspended bars of music widened the silence. She stopped where Winifred should have received the principal subscribers. The master of ceremonies lowered the program. No one corrected him. Nicholas had not yet entered the ballroom. Winifred understood the trap before anyone spoke. If she protested, she would be called jealous. If she left, Delphine would inherit the room. If she remained without acknowledgement, society would pretend the substitution had been too small to notice. Winifred closed her fan. The soft click traveled farther than it should have. She stepped forward and bowed, not the slight inclination one duchess offered a lady of lower rank. A deeper bow, a deliberate bow, a bow that made every witness confront the place Delphine had taken. "Then I shall not obstruct the place His Grace has chosen to give you," Winifred said. Delphine's triumph faltered for one instant. She had expected anger, perhaps tears, perhaps a cold withdrawal that could be retold as feminine spite. She had not expected dignity sharpened into evidence. "Your Grace misunderstands," Delphine replied. "I was told the arrangement would please the subscribers." "Were you?" Winifred asked. The western doors opened. Nicholas Rivington, Duke of Redbourne, entered with 2 gentlemen from the Foreign Office at his side. He saw Winifred bowed before Delphine. His gaze dropped to the silver-blue rosette, then to the program in the master of ceremonies' hand, then to Winifred's closed fan. His expression changed with such precision that only someone who knew him well would have seen the shock beneath the restraint. Winifred knew him well enough. Nicholas crossed the room without haste, but no one mistook his speed for calm. "Stop the music," he said. The conductor lowered his baton. The last vibration of the strings faded. Nicholas faced the master of ceremonies. "Read the appointment again." The man swallowed. "Lady Delphine Mallory, principal patroness, by the appointment of His Grace." There was no such appointment. The words were quiet. They reached every corner. Delphine lifted her chin. "Nicholas, you can't mean. You'll address me as Your Grace in this room." A flush rose beneath her composure. Nicholas turned to the guests. "The principal patroness of the Redbourne widow's subscription is, and has always been, Her Grace the Duchess of Redbourne. No instruction bearing my signature or seal has altered that fact." He moved to Winifred and bowed to her with a depth that caused several ladies to look away. Then he offered his hand. "Will you return to your place?" Winifred looked at the hand without taking it. She remembered how often that same hand had guided ministers through delicate conversations, ended disputes with a gesture, and made difficult truths appear lighter than they were. Tonight she would not allow one elegant motion to turn public injury into a corrected seating error. "You can restore a place, Nicholas," she said. "You can't yet restore the truth of how it was taken." The room heard her. Nicholas did not close the distance between them. He did not catch her fingers or speak over the refusal. His hand lowered slowly to his side. "No," he said. "I can't." The answer changed something in the silence. Delphine recovered first. "This began with your own words at the committee supper. You said I might have whatever part would keep the subscribers amused." Nicholas's eyes sharpened. "I said nothing that appointed you to my wife's office. Others understood you differently. Then they'll explain themselves." Winifred opened her fan halfway. Nicholas noticed. No one else did. He turned toward the household steward. "Mr. Bell, collect the program used by the Master of Ceremonies. Seal it in his presence and in yours. No copy is to be destroyed, corrected, or removed." "Yes, Your Grace. The conductor will surrender the score before leaving the house. Every marked page is to remain exactly as it stands." The conductor's face had gone pale. "Of course, Your Grace." "The orchestra won't resume until Her Grace decides whether this gathering continues." Nicholas looked at Winifred, not as a command but as a question. The distinction mattered. Winifred surveyed the ballroom. The widows seated near the southern wall had begun to look frightened, as though the scandal might cause donors to leave before subscriptions were pledged. She would not let Delphine's performance cost them winter coal and rent. "The gathering will continue," Winifred said, "but the receiving line is ended." She turned to the chairman of the subscription. "The widows will be seated first for supper. The subscription books will remain open. No guest is to be asked for an opinion upon what has occurred." The chairman bowed. "As Your Grace directs." Only then did Winifred look at Delphine. The silver-blue rosette remained pinned above her heart. "You may keep what you brought into this room," Winifred said. "For now." Delphine's fingers moved toward the rosette, then stopped. "You're making a spectacle of an error." "No," Winifred replied. "The spectacle was prepared before I bowed." Delphine held her gaze, but the room no longer belonged to her. She left through the eastern doors with the unique rosette still in her possession, and her brother nowhere visible among the guests. Nicholas watched her go, then looked toward the conductor's stand. A page of the score had been folded back. Near the opening quadrille, a streak of red grease pencil marked the place where the music had held. Winifred saw it at the same moment he did. Her fan closed completely. Nicholas did not ask what the signal meant. He already knew. She intended to leave the ballroom, but not the truth. Mr. Bell lifted the opening night program with gloved hands. The conductor began gathering the score. Around them, society resumed breathing, though no one dared pretend the evening had returned to what it had been. The Duchess had bowed. The Duke had stopped the music. Somewhere between those two acts, a private insult had become an investigation. By the time the last subscriber had left Rivington House, the candles in the withdrawing room had burned low enough to turn the gilt moldings dull. Winifred stood beside the hearth with her black silk fan closed against her palm. Beyond the double doors, servants moved through the aftermath of the benefit ball in disciplined silence. Glasses were gathered, chairs were straightened. The orchestra had gone only after surrendering its score to Mr. Bell. The evening had continued, because Winifred had ordered it to continue. But nothing inside the house had returned to its former shape. Nicholas entered without his coat and closed the door behind him. He did not approach at once. "The final subscription total exceeds last year's by nearly £600, he said. Winifred looked at him. "You didn't come here to discuss the total." "No." He stopped several feet away. "I came because Delphine said the appointment began with my words." "Did it?" Nicholas's jaw tightened. He had spent years making difficult conversation seem smaller, through timing, wit, and an ease that encouraged other people to follow him away from discomfort. Tonight, none of those gifts would help him. At the committee supper in February, Neville complained that the subscription needed a more fashionable public face. "I was sitting 3 places from you. You left before the final course to speak with Mrs. Price about her rent allowance. And while I was gone," Nicholas glanced toward the fire, "Delphine said she could draw subscribers who found committee work tedious." Neville asked what role I would give her. What did you say? I said, Lady Delphine may have whatever part keeps the subscribers amused. The words entered the room with less noise than the ballroom announcement, yet Winifred felt the same cold precision beneath them. Who heard you? Neville, the committee clerk. Sir Malcolm Vane. Delphine returned before the conversation ended. Did you name an office? No. Did you authorize a program alteration? No. Did you instruct anyone to place her above me? No. Did you correct Neville when he called her the subscription's natural ornament? Nicholas was silent. Winifred opened the fan 1 measured inch. You remember? I remember changing the subject. With a joke? Yes. And did Delphine understand that your remark carried no authority? She should have. That isn't an answer. Nicholas met her eyes. No, I never said it plainly. The admission settled between them. Winifred looked down at the black silk. One silver crescent near the outer edge remained unfinished, its last curve stopping where her mother's needle had stopped years before. Nicholas followed her gaze. The final crescent, he said. You've never completed it. Winifred looked up sharply. You noticed? I noticed the first winter after our marriage. You turn that edge inward when you don't wish anyone to ask about it. His voice softened, but he did not step nearer. You open the fan fully when you mean to remain in a room. You close it when you've decided to leave, and when you tap the guard twice against your glove, someone has lied. Winifred had never explained those signals. She had not believed he understood any language she did not speak aloud. You observed me, she said. Yes, but you did not ask what any of it meant. No. Why? Nicholas gave a brief, humorless breath. Because asking might have required an answer I could not make pleasant. That was closer to truth than charm. Winifred turned the fan in her hand. Delphine was your mistress. Before you and I were engaged, I know. The affair ended in March 1841. There was no renewal after that. Not during our engagement. Not during our marriage. I know that too. Nicholas's expression shifted. Then tonight was not about believing I had betrayed you in that way. No. Winifred's voice remained calm. It was about being made to bow before the woman London still believes has more influence over my husband than I do. The distinction struck him more deeply than an accusation of adultery would have done. He crossed to the writing table but did not sit. After our marriage, I thought silence would make the old connection disappear. Silence preserved it. I see that now. Do you? Winifred asked. Delphine continued to be invited because no one wished to offend you. She continued to imply familiarity because you never publicly defined its limits. You avoided scandal, and she kept the ambiguity. Nicholas looked toward the closed doors as though the ballroom waited beyond them to confirm every word. She has received fewer invitations this season, yes. And Neville's influence has declined with hers, yes. You believe this was an attempt to restore her position. I believe Delphine understands that social influence is the only property she controls without her brother's permission. I believe Neville knows it. Whether he promised her admiration, security, or revenge, we will discover. You think he used her fear of becoming irrelevant. I think fear is more useful to men like Neville than loyalty. Nicholas's face hardened. Then I'll question him tonight. No. Winifred, he arranged this beneath my roof. And if you confront him now, he will destroy whatever he believes connects him to the program. The score is already secured. One object is secured. We do not yet know how many exist. Nicholas stopped. The impulse to act remained visible in his shoulders. Winifred watched him decide whether to obey her reasoning or satisfy his anger. What do you require? He asked. An inquiry conducted in an order I choose. Agreed. You will not dismiss the committee clerk before we know whether he acted from corruption, fear, or obedience. Agreed. You will issue no public statement about me without showing me every word. Nicholas hesitated only once. Agreed. I will determine the questions asked of Delphine. Agreed. And when the truth is known, I will decide how my name is restored. He looked at her closed fan. Not how our name is restored, no, mine. Nicholas bowed his head. Yours. The door opened after a discreet knock. Mr. Bell entered carrying no documents. Your Graces, the conductor has surrendered the full score. I witnessed the transfer. Where is it now? Winifred asked. Locked in the steward's cabinet. It will be inventoried in the morning. and formally sealed in the presence of the solicitor. The program used by the Master of Ceremonies has been sealed separately. Has anyone else handled either item? Only the conductor, myself, and the Master of Ceremonies in my presence. Good. Mr. Bell glanced toward Nicholas, then back to Winifred. There is a marking in red grease pencil near the opening quadrille. I did not unfold the page beyond what was necessary to confirm the notation existed. What does it say? Nicholas asked. I could read only the first words, Your Grace. Hold 3 bars. The remainder was partly beneath the fold. Winifred's fingers tightened around the fan. 3 bars. The length of the silence in which Delphine had crossed the floor. Nicholas saw the connection at the same instant, but he did not speak over her. The page must remain exactly as it is, Winifred said. No one opens it until the solicitor is present. Yes, Your Grace. Who requested the score's marked arrangement? The conductor says the instruction came through the committee clerk after a private rehearsal on Monday. May 15th, Winifred said. 3 days before the ball. Mr. Bell inclined his head. Yes, Your Grace. Did he name who attended? Not yet. He was frightened and asked whether he might give a full account before witnesses. He will. Winifred opened the fan halfway. Send word to the solicitor at first light. The conductor is to be treated courteously and allowed to leave, but he must be told not to discuss the score. Mr. Bell bowed and withdrew. Nicholas remained still until the door closed. You were right, he said, about waiting. That does not make me pleased. No, he looked at the fan half open. Winifred's gaze met his. What do you think it means? That you haven't decided whether to remain. In this room? In more than this room. The answer held no attempt to make her reassure him. For the first time that night, Nicholas allowed uncertainty to remain visible. Winifred did not soften it for him. Then help me find the truth before you ask what remains. She closed the fan no farther. Nicholas bowed, not as a duke ending an audience, but as a husband accepting terms he had not been entitled to set. Outside, the house settled into darkness. Inside the steward's cabinet, 2 sealed objects waited apart from one another. One had announced Delphine's authority. The other had measured the silence required to make Winifred bow. On the morning of May 20, the red-cued score lay sealed upon the long table in the library at Rivington House, beside a second envelope that contained the actual program used by the Master of Ceremonies on the night of the ball. Mr. Bell had recorded the surrender of the score on May 18, formally inventoried and sealed it the following day, and kept both objects in separate locked compartments until the solicitor arrived. Now Winifred sat at the head of the table with her black silk fan closed beside her hand. Nicholas stood to her right, far enough away that no one could mistake his presence for control. Across from them waited Mr. Sorrel, the conductor, pale beneath the morning light. The family solicitor examined the signatures crossing the seal. The score hasn't been opened since it was inventoried, he asked. Mr. Bell shook his head. No, sir. It remained in my cabinet. The program was sealed separately and hasn't been disturbed. The solicitor turned to Winifred. Do you wish the score opened first, Your Grace? Yes. The program will remain sealed until its custody is transferred. Nicholas looked at the second envelope but said nothing. The solicitor cut the score's seal and unfolded the opening pages without flattening the paper more than necessary. The red grease pencil mark appeared beside the first quadrille. Beneath it, in a hurried but legible hand, stood the instruction. Hold 3 bars. Lady D receives the bow. The room became still. Winifred read the sentence once. She did not need to read it again. Who wrote that? She asked. Mr. Sorrel swallowed. I did, Your Grace. At whose direction? The committee clerk brought the request. He said Lord Mallory had authority to arrange a private rehearsal. When? Monday, May 15th. Who attended? The conductor's eyes moved toward Nicholas before returning to Winifred. Lord Mallory was there for part of it. The clerk remained throughout. Lady Delphine attended. 2 first violins were present, and the Master of Ceremonies came in near the end to confirm the wording. Nicholas's hand closed over the back of the chair before him. You rehearsed my wife's humiliation 3 days before the ball. Mr. Sorrel flinched. Winifred did not look at Nicholas. You'll allow him to answer the questions asked. Nicholas released the chair. Yes. Winifred turned back to the conductor. Why was the pause necessary? Lady Delphine said the announcement must be fully heard before she reached the receiving line. She wanted the room to understand her position before another name was spoken. Did she mention me? Yes. His voice lowered. She said, "The Duchess will understand what is required once the room has seen it." Nicholas took a step away from the table. "I'm going to Mallory House." "No." Winifred's answer was quiet, but it stopped him. "She has just been placed at a rehearsal designed to force you to bow. And if you confront her now, she'll call it an entrance rehearsal for a patroness. We don't yet have the printer's records. We don't know who changed the program or what authority was claimed. We have this." He gestured toward the score. "We have proof that a pause was arranged. We do not yet have proof of the lie that made the pause useful." Nicholas looked at the red instruction, as though anger alone might burn it from the page. "What would you have me do?" "Wait." The word cost him. Winifred saw it in the tightening of his jaw, yet he inclined his head. "I'll wait." She returned her attention to Mr. Sorrel. "How were you paid?" 5 guineas beyond my contracted fee. Lord Mallory gave the money to the clerk, and the clerk paid me after the rehearsal." "Was there a receipt?" "Yes. I signed one in Lord Mallory's name." The solicitor made a note. "Where is it?" The clerk kept the original. I retained the counterfoil. "You'll bring it before noon," Winifred said. "I will. Did anyone ask you to alter the score after the ball?" "No, Your Grace. Did anyone ask you to remove this page?" Mr. Sorrel hesitated. "Not yet." Nicholas looked at him sharply. Winifred heard the unspoken fear beneath the answer. "If anyone approaches you, you will report it directly to the solicitor. You will not bargain, hide, or improvise." "I understand." "Do you?" Winifred asked. "A man who obeys one improper instruction often believes he can repair it by obeying another. You will not." Shame passed over the conductor's face. "No, Your Grace, I won't." The solicitor asked Mr. Sorrel to sign a written account of the morning's evidence. It was not yet a sworn deposition. That would require a proper officer and a later formal statement if the inquiry advanced. When the conductor had signed, the solicitor folded the score exactly as it had been found and resealed it in a new portfolio. Mr. Bell then placed the second sealed envelope upon the table. "This contains the program used by the Master of Ceremonies on May 18th, he said. "I collected it in his presence, after Her Grace ordered the receiving line ended." The solicitor inspected the seal but did not open it. Mr. Bell signed a separate transfer receipt. The score and program were entered as different exhibits. One marked Conductor's Red Cued Score, and the other program used by the Master of Ceremonies on May 18. "They'll travel separately to Lincoln's Inn," the solicitor said. "They'll be stored in the same locked cabinet, but in distinct sealed packets." Winifred nodded. "No clerk examines them alone." "Agreed." Nicholas watched the two objects leave the table under the solicitor's custody. Only when the library door closed behind them did he speak. "You were right to stop me." "Yes. You don't have to sound surprised. I am not surprised." A faint, unwilling change touched his mouth, but the joke did not come. He let the silence remain. Later that morning, they crossed to the ballroom with a fresh floor plan, Mr. Bell walking behind them. The chandeliers were unlit, and daylight revealed the room without mercy. Winifred stood at the eastern doors where Delphine had entered. She measured the distance to the receiving line in careful steps. "The first bar brought her to the center," she said. "The second carried her past the principal subscribers. The third held her here." She stopped upon the exact place where Delphine had waited for the announcement to finish. Nicholas stood beside the plan on a narrow console table. "And you were there?" He pointed to the position at the head of the line. "Yes." The pause gave the room time to look from her to you. That was its purpose. Winifred leaned over the plan to draw the path. Nicholas bent at the same moment. Their shoulders brushed. The contact was slight, but both became still. Nicholas stepped back first, restoring the distance without apology or claim. Winifred did not move away from the map. She completed the line in one steady stroke. "You said last night that you could restore my place," she said. "I was wrong to say it as though the place were the whole injury. You were wrong because you thought the room was yours to restore." He accepted the correction. "Yes, A footman entered, carrying a card from a printer near Fleet Street. Winifred opened it. Mrs. Agnes Vale requested a private interview. She had preserved the first approved proof of the benefit program. It named Winifred as principal patroness and Lady Delphine only as an honorary subscriber. Nicholas read the card after Winifred handed it to him. Then the name was changed after approval. Yes, and someone expected the first proof to disappear. Winifred closed her fan once. Tomorrow we find out who. The first proof had not vanished. It waited beneath an iron weight in a narrow printing room near Fleet Street, bearing Winifred's name in clean black type, while London repeated the lie that had replaced it. On the morning of May 22, Winifred entered Mrs. Agnes Vale's shop with Lady Margaret Henslow at her side and the family solicitor walking a pace behind. The smell of ink and hot metal clung to the air. Pressmen worked beyond a partition, their movements steady despite the presence of a Duchess. Mrs. Vale stood beside a long table with one finger darkened by ink and her gray hair pinned beneath a plain cap. She did not curtsy until she had locked the inner door. "Your Grace, I'm grateful you came before anyone else learned what I kept." Winifred placed her black silk fan beside her glove but did not open it. "You said the first approved proof survived." "It did, so did the correction that followed." Mrs. Vale glanced toward the front of the shop. Nicholas had arrived in a separate carriage and remained outside the workroom, because Winifred had not yet invited him in. He could see her through the glass partition, but he made no attempt to enter. "Show me the first proof," Winifred said. Mrs. Vale unlocked a fixed iron chest beneath the table and withdrew a protective folder. She placed it before Winifred, but kept one hand upon the cover. Inside lay the approved printer's proof dated May 8. Beneath the heading for the Redbourne widow's subscription, the names appeared exactly as Winifred had approved them. Her Grace the Duchess of Redbourne, principal patroness. Lady Delphine Mallory stood lower on the page among the honorary subscribers. Winifred read the lines without touching the paper. The solicitor copied the date into his notebook. "Who approved this version?" he asked. "Her Grace did through the committee clerk," Mrs. Vale replied. "I received the marked copy with no alterations to the patronage line." "And the later version?" Winifred asked. Mrs. Vale turned the protective sheet. The altered printer's proof was dated May 12. Winifred's name had been removed from the principal position. In its place stood Lady Delphine Mallory, principal patroness by the appointment of His Grace. The type was neat. The theft looked orderly. "Who requested the change?" Winifred asked. "The committee clerk delivered it himself. He said Lord Mallory had received verbal approval from the Duke." "Was there a signed instruction?" "No." "A ducal seal?" "No." "Any paper from Rivington House?" "Nothing." The solicitor leaned closer. "Did the clerk explain why Her Grace's name was removed?" "He said society would understand the arrangement once the ball began." Winifred's gaze remained on the altered line. "Did he use those exact words?" "Yes, Your Grace. I wrote them in my daybook because they struck me as improper." Mrs. Vale opened a smaller ledger and showed the entry. The sentence had been recorded beside the delivery time. Nicholas remained visible beyond the partition. He did not move when the solicitor glanced toward him. "What became of the first proof after the change?" Winifred asked. "I returned it to the iron chest." "Were you asked to destroy it?" Mrs. Vale's mouth tightened. 2 days later, a man wearing Mallory livery came to ask whether I had cleared the old impressions from storage. He said Lord Mallory disliked confusion in charitable accounts. "Did he offer money?" £10 if the waste paper disappeared before the ball. Lady Margaret drew a quiet breath. Winifred did not look away from Mrs. Vale. "Why did you refuse?" "My husband taught me that a printer who destroys the first truth becomes servant to the second. He died 6 years ago. I won't dishonor his shop because an earl prefers a cleaner lie." Winifred inclined her head. "You have preserved more than paper, Mrs. Vale." "I preserved my own name as well, Your Grace." The answer pleased Winifred more than gratitude would have done. She asked the solicitor to prepare signed copies of both proofs and a statement from Mrs. Vale. "The originals did not leave the shop, Mrs. Vale returned them to the protective folder, locked them inside the fixed iron chest, and kept the key upon a chain at her waist. Only after the lock turned did Winifred ask for Nicholas to be admitted. He entered without looking toward the chest. "Mrs. Vale," he said, "I owe you thanks." "You owe her grace truth," the widow replied. "The paper merely helps." Nicholas accepted the correction. "Then I owe you respect for preserving it, Mrs. Vale studied him for a moment, then brought out one final memorandum. "There's another matter. A silk mercer from Ludgate sent this after hearing of the ballroom disturbance. The document recorded an order placed by Neville Mallory on May 13 for one silver-blue committee rosette, charged to his private account and delivered to Lady Delphine Mallory. One rosette, no second badge, no general committee order." Winifred remembered the exact shade above Delphine's heart. "He ordered it after the altered proof was set," she said. "And 2 days before the rehearsal," Nicholas added. "They built the appearance of office before the room saw her." Winifred looked at him. Yes, he did not claim the conclusion as his own. The solicitor took a signed copy of the mercer's memorandum. The original remained with the merchant, whose statement would be requested separately. When the work was finished, Mrs. Vale relocked her daybook and walked them to the outer room. The press resumed its heavy rhythm. Nicholas stepped aside to allow Winifred and Lady Margaret to pass first. Outside, Fleet Street moved beneath a pale spring sky crowded with carts, apprentices, messengers, and men who had no idea that a duchess's name had nearly been erased inside the shop behind them. Winifred's carriage waited at the curb. Nicholas's stood several yards farther on. He did not assume he would ride with her. At the carriage step, Winifred gathered her skirt. The iron edge was damp from a morning shower. Nicholas stopped beside her but did not touch her arm. "May I?" he asked. Winifred looked at his offered forearm. This was not the public hand he had extended in the ballroom, asking her to return to a place before the truth had been found. It was a smaller gesture, private, requested rather than presumed. She placed her gloved hand upon his sleeve. Nicholas held still until she had chosen her balance, then steadied his arm without covering her fingers. The contact lasted only long enough for her to step into the carriage. Yet Winifred felt the restraint in it more clearly than pressure. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." He released the moment at once. Lady Margaret entered after her. Before the door could close, the solicitor approached with a letter that had arrived at the shop during their interview. "Your Graces, this was sent by a merchant who declined to participate in the Harbridge and Croft proposal." Nicholas broke the outer fold, only after Winifred nodded. The letter stated that Neville Mallory had privately guaranteed part of the firm's debt. If Harbridge and Croft failed to secure the Redbourne subscription's proposed 3-year contract, the creditor could demand payment from Neville before the end of May. Winifred read the final line twice. The program did not merely give Delphine a place, she said. It gave her a vote near a contract. Nicholas looked toward the printing shop, then at the letter in her hand. "And removing you cleared the only person who had already objected." Winifred closed her fan against her palm. The altered name, the rehearsed pause, and the rosette were no longer separate insults. They were parts of a transaction. "Find the contract papers," she said. "All of them." Nicholas inclined his head. "Exactly as you ask." The carriage door closed between them, but the words remained with her as the horses turned west. By the following afternoon, the Harbridge and Croft proposal lay open across the morning-room table at Rivington House, and Neville Mallory's name appeared nowhere upon its face. That omission made his interest more dangerous, not less. Winifred stood beside the window with the merchant's letter from Fleet Street in one hand, and the contract papers before her. Nicholas had found them in the subscription committee files exactly where the clerk had placed them, beneath a cover marked "Routine Provision for Benefit Events." The wording was bland. The sums were not. Harbridge and Croft proposed to supply printing, supper service, temporary furnishings, and decorative goods for 3 years, at prices nearly 1/3 above the competing estimates Winifred had collected in February. The comparison sheet she had prepared was missing from the bundle. Her covering memorandum remained, bearing Nicholas's initial at the top. The appendix in which she had explained the excess charges was not there. "You remember signing this?" she asked. Nicholas looked at the initial. I remember reading the first paragraph. And the appendix? No. You initialed the paper as received. Yes. His answer carried no defense. Winifred set the memorandum beside the creditor's letter. The contract would have bound the widow's subscription to inflated prices for 3 years. I objected because the cost of one season's unnecessary flowers would have funded several months of rent assistance. And I changed the subject at dinner. You made a joke about charitable committees, preferring claret to arithmetic. Nicholas's mouth tightened. I remember that too. Neville was seated across from you. So was Delphine. Then they learned 2 things. I had refused the contract, and you had no intention of asking why. Nicholas turned toward the other papers. The creditor's memorandum gave the missing motive more plainly than the contract did. Neville had guaranteed part of Harbridge and Croft's private debt. If the firm secured the Redbourne subscriptions contract, the principal creditor would extend repayment and release Neville from an immediate demand. If the contract failed, £2,000 would fall due before the end of May. Attached to the memorandum was a demand note dated the previous week. The creditor had already refused a second delay. Nicholas read the figure twice. £2,000. Enough to expose the condition of Mallory finances before the season ends. Enough to make Neville desperate. Desperation explains urgency, Winifred said. It doesn't explain why Delphine agreed to stand where I stood. Nicholas looked toward the hearth. Influence. More than vanity. Winifred drew Delphine's calling history from memory. Invitations had thinned after Nicholas's marriage. Hostesses still received her, but with greater caution. Patronesses who once valued her closeness to a future duke had begun to choose safer companions. Delphine owns no estate, Winifred said. She controls no independent fortune large enough to protect her place. Her value in society depended upon the belief that she could still reach you. She can't. Privately, perhaps not. Publicly, you never made the limit clear. Nicholas accepted the distinction with visible effort. Neville promised that placing her above you would restore what she had lost and protect House Mallory from financial embarrassment. If she appeared to possess your confidence, subscribers might follow her into the contract vote. She wasn't buying gowns with the proceeds. No, she was buying continued relevance. The truth did not soften Delphine's conduct. It made the method more believable. Neville had not needed to persuade his sister that Nicholas still loved her. He had needed only to remind her how quickly London forgot women whose influence had no formal protection. Nicholas gathered the competing estimates and placed them beside the proposal. What do we know for certain? That Harbridge and Croft charged more than the alternatives. That I objected. That Neville guaranteed their debt. That Delphine's false office would have given her proximity to the contract vote. And that my carelessness taught them I would not examine your objection. Winifred looked at him. Yes, he did not turn the admission into another apology. That restraint mattered more than repetition would have done. A footman entered with a sealed note from Neville's creditor. The enclosed schedule stated that payment would be demanded on May 31, unless the Harbridge and Croft contract produced fresh security. The deadline stood 8 days away. Nicholas laid the page flat. Then the program, the rehearsal, and the rosette were not separate preparations. They were a timetable. May 12, the altered proof. May 13, the rosette. May 15, the rehearsal. May 18, the ball. The contract vote would have followed before the creditor's demand. If you had accepted the humiliation quietly, Delphine would already look established. And if I protested without evidence, I would look jealous. Nicholas's gaze held hers. They understood the room. They understood what the room expected from a wife. Later that afternoon, Winifred brought the guest flow map from her writing desk. It was not evidence of fraud, yet it was evidence of something Nicholas had failed to see. Every doorway, chair, supper route, and subscription table carried her annotations. She had positioned the widows near the southern wall because the light there was gentler and the distance to the withdrawing room shorter. She had placed the musicians above the eastern doors, so the first quadrille would draw attention toward the receiving line. The same arrangement had been used to elevate Delphine. Nicholas stood on the opposite side of the table. You designed where every person would move. Yes, the carriage entrance for the older women, the quiet supper room, the subscription books. Yes, I thought the evening appeared effortless. Winifred traced the route from the southern wall to the supper doors. Effortlessness is often the appearance created by labor no one has bothered to name. Nicholas looked at the notes in her hand. I mistook admiring what you made for understanding what it cost you. The sentence was not enough to repair anything, but it was accurate. Winifred moved one paper aside. Nicholas reached for the same corner. Their fingertips brushed over the map. Neither withdrew at once. The contact was slight, no more than warmth through gloves, yet it held a question neither was prepared to ask. Nicholas lifted his hand first. He did not apologize for touching her, and he did not claim the moment. Winifred continued arranging the papers. Though her pulse had altered, the committee clerk may have removed my appendix, she said, or Neville may have asked for it. We need the original file register and the account book. Mr. Pritchard has it. Then he keeps it. No one brings it here until we know who has access to the committee rooms. Nicholas nodded. I'll ask for copies of the entry list, not the book itself. Exactly. A second footman entered carrying Lady Delphine's calling card upon a silver tray. Beneath her engraved name, she had written a single sentence. His Grace encouraged me to accept a visible role. I regret that Her Grace has chosen to misunderstand generosity as insult. Winifred read it once and placed it beside the creditor's deadline. Nicholas's expression hardened. She is trying to make the dispute personal. Because the financial reason cannot survive examination. Will you answer? Winifred took up her pen. Her reply contained one line. Her Grace looks forward to Lady Delphine's exact account of the role she accepted, the authority she received, and the benefit she intended to confer. Nicholas read it after she handed it to him. You've given her no room to discuss feelings. Feelings are where she wants the evidence to disappear. Before the card could be sent, Mr. Bell entered with a message from Mr. Pritchard, the subscription treasurer. An audit sheet had been prepared for circulation before the next committee meeting. It listed the ball's flowers, musicians, supper, and hired carriages beneath a new heading. Personal ceremonial expenditure, authorized by Her Grace the Duchess of Redbourne. The figures were genuine. Their meaning had been changed. Winifred closed her fan. Neville had failed to purchase her authority. Now he intended to make it look as though she had spent widow's money to decorate her own humiliation. Every number on the audit sheet was true, and the page published all lied. By noon on May 25, copies had reached nearly every principal subscriber to the Redbourne Widows subscription, each one printed beneath a heading that transformed charity into vanity. Personal ceremonial expenditure, authorized by Her Grace the Duchess of Redbourne. Winifred sat in the morning room at Rivington House with one copy before her, and Mr. Pritchard's covering note beside it. Nicholas stood across the table. Mr. Pritchard himself occupied the chair nearest the fire, his spectacles low upon his nose, and his expression more severe with every line he read. Flowers for the benefit ball, £112. Musicians and copying, £84. Supper and hired service, £209. Carriages for invited widows, £26. All genuine charges, Winifred said. Yes, Your Grace, and none entered in your book as my personal expenditure. None. Mr. Pritchard removed his spectacles. The committee clerk received copied entries and supplier invoices. He didn't receive my original account book, and he had no authority to alter the purpose of the payments. The book remained locked in his office, exactly where it had been since the audit sheet first appeared. Winifred looked again at the printed heading. Flowers, music, supper, and carriages had brought subscribers and widows together without turning need into spectacle. Every expense had served the appeal. On the page that purpose had been stripped away. The lie isn't in the figures, Nicholas said. It is in deciding what the figures mean. Winifred raised her eyes to him. Yes, Mr. Pritchard pointed to the middle of the sheet. There is one further irregularity. Invoice 317 appears twice. The number stood once beside supper linen and hired serving tables, then again beside a second charge for the same service under a different sum. Could it be a copying error? Nicholas asked. "It could," Mr. Pritchard replied. "I can't say more until the merchant papers are examined." "Then we do not accuse anyone of double billing yet," Winifred said. "We record a duplicate number and request the originals." "Precisely." A footman entered with a note from Mrs. Price, one of the widows supported by the subscription. Winifred recognized the careful hand before she broke the seal. Mrs. Price wrote that several subscribers had threatened to suspend their monthly gifts until the Duchess explained why widows' money had purchased ballroom flowers. The next rent allowance was due at the end of the month. 11 women depended upon it. Mrs. Price asked whether they should prepare their landlords for delay. Winifred read the final line twice. The scandal had already reached women who could not afford to treat it as conversation. "What is it?" Nicholas asked. Winifred handed him the note. His face changed as he read. "The allowance can't be delayed. No, I will make up the difference privately, and Neville will say the Duke paid to hide his wife's misuse of charitable funds. Then I'll postpone tomorrow's meeting until the evidence is complete." "No," Nicholas looked at her. "The room will be hostile before you enter it. Postponement will be called concealment. We don't have the merchant papers. Then I will say, we do not have them. They'll interrupt before you finish. Some will. Mrs. Price and the other women cannot wait for society to become courteous." Nicholas walked to the window, then turned back. "If the accusation is allowed to stand for another week, subscriptions may fall further. Which is why I will face it tomorrow. Winifred, they're preparing to call you a thief." "Then do not make me look frightened of the word." The answer stopped him. Mr. Pritchard lowered his gaze to the audit sheet. Nicholas remained near the window. "I can issue a statement before the meeting," he said. "I'll accept responsibility for every payment made under the Redbourne name. I'll say the committee officers handled the accounts." Winifred's fan rested closed beside her hand. "Do not save me by saying I did nothing." He grew still. "That isn't what I mean. It is what the room will hear. They will forgive me because a husband has declared me decorative. I'm trying to stop them from destroying your reputation. My reputation includes the work I performed. If you remove the work, you have not defended me. You have replaced one lie with another." Nicholas came back to the table but did not stand over her. He took the chair opposite. "Then tell me what the statement must say." "It must say that I directed the benefits planning and approved legitimate expenses for its charitable purpose. It must say the classifications are disputed. It must say the duplicate invoice number requires examination. It must not declare me absent from responsibility merely because responsibility has become dangerous. And the committee officers? They retain responsibility for keeping and presenting the accounts. That does not erase mine." Nicholas nodded slowly. "I understand. You understood the words in the withdrawing room as well." The reminder struck cleanly. "You're right. You will draft the statement here." "Yes, I will read every line. Yes, no secretary shortens it. No advisor strengthens it. No sentence is issued because the room becomes unpleasant." Nicholas held her gaze. "Agreed." Mr. Pritchard gathered the audit sheet and his notes. "I will bring the original account book to Hanover Square Rooms tomorrow in its locked case. It will remain in my possession until the chairman requests an entry." "No one examines it alone," Winifred said. "No one, Your Grace." "Request the merchant papers through the proper committee channel." "I will, and tell Mrs. Price the allowances will not be suspended without a formal vote." Mr. Pritchard bowed. She should hear that from the committee, not from rumor. When he had gone, Nicholas sat at the writing desk. Winifred reviewed the audit sheet, while the scratch of his pen filled the room. The first draft failed in its final paragraph. Nicholas had written that Her Grace bore no responsibility for errors committed by officers charged with the accounts. Winifred placed one finger beneath the sentence. "This must go, because it removes authority, because it acquits me by making me irrelevant." He crossed out the paragraph. The second draft named her direction of the event, the legitimate purpose of the expenses, and the need for an examination independent of the officers who had prepared the public summary. Winifred changed the phrase independent review to an examination by persons unconnected with the disputed payments. Nicholas accepted the correction without comment. By late afternoon, the final statement lay unsigned beneath a glass weight. Winifred read it once more. "This is the version you will use. Exactly this version. Even if they shout over me. Even if Delphine speaks first." Yes. A messenger from the committee arrived before dinner with the seating order for Hanover Square rooms. Nicholas had been placed at the center of the platform. Winifred's chair stood one step behind and to his right. Delphine had been given a front seat among the patronesses. Every chair would hold a copy of the audit sheet. Attached to the order was a note from Nicholas's secretary. For clarity and force, he had prepared a shortened speaking copy of the Duke's statement. Nicholas opened the enclosed page. The approved references to Winifred's direction of the benefit had vanished. The first line now declared that the Duchess had no responsibility for the accounts. Winifred watched him read it. "He believes this will sound stronger," she said. Nicholas looked from the shortened page to the full statement beneath the glass. "It sounds simpler. That is how Neville's lies have survived." Nicholas folded neither page. He left the shortened copy open beside the approved one. "Tomorrow," Winifred said, "you will have to decide which truth you can bear to let the room hear." By the time Winifred entered Hanover Square rooms on the afternoon of May 26, every chair already held a copy of the audit sheet, and every face had been given a conclusion before she was allowed to speak. The gilt room had been arranged with a narrow platform at one end. Nicholas's chair stood in the center. Winifred's had been placed one step behind and to his right. Delphine sat among the patronesses in pale blue silk, without the silver-blue rosette, but with the composure of a woman who believed the room had already accepted her version of events. Neville remained near the committee clerk's table, speaking quietly to two ladies who held proxy votes for absent subscribers. Mr. Pritchard guarded the original account book in a locked leather case at his feet. It had never left his possession. Nicholas met Winifred at the edge of the platform. The approved statement rested inside his coat. The shortened copy lay upon the desk before him. "The full version is with me," he said quietly. "Then keep it there until I ask for it." His gaze moved across the hostile rows. "I remember." Winifred opened her black silk fan and took her assigned chair. The chairman called the meeting to order. Before Mr. Pritchard could explain the disputed classifications, Delphine rose. "No one questions Her Grace's generosity," she said, which ensured that everyone would. "But generosity does not explain why widows' subscriptions purchased flowers for a ducal ballroom." Several ladies murmured agreement. Winifred stood. "The flowers formed part of a benefit that raised more than 4 times their cost." "And the music?" Delphine asked. "Also part of the benefit. £209 for supper?" For subscribers, invited widows, attendants, and hired service. The event was designed to raise funds without requiring women in distress to parade their need before society. Lady Bramwell lifted the audit sheet. "Then why are these charges printed as your personal ceremonial expenditure?" "Because someone changed the headings after the entries left the treasurer's office." Neville stepped forward. "That is a grave accusation against a committee clerk who can scarcely defend himself against a duchess." "He is present," Winifred said. Every head turned toward the clerk, whose color faded. "He may answer when the chairman recognizes him." Delphine's smile remained gentle. "Perhaps the simpler question is whether your grace authorized the expenses." "I did." The room shifted. Winifred continued before the admission could be claimed for her. "I approved legitimate expenses for a fundraising event. I did not approve these headings, nor did I approve the repeated use of invoice number 317. Mr. Pritchard unlocked his leather case at the chairman's request, but did not surrender the account book. He placed it upon the table beneath his own hand. "The original entries do not describe these sums as personal expenditure. However, the merchant papers have not yet been examined. I cannot state whether the repeated number represents copying error or duplicate billing." Neville spread his hands. "Then there is no proof of wrongdoing." "There is proof that this sheet presents purpose as vanity," Winifred replied. "There is also sufficient reason to examine the merchant's papers before any contract vote." Lady Bramwell frowned. "Why should a widow's subscription require tulips at all?" Because wealthy subscribers who ignore a plain appeal will pay to be seen at a beautiful event. Their vanity financed coal, rent assistance, and mourning allowances. Several faces changed. Delphine rose again. How efficient. The poor become an excuse for splendor, and splendor becomes evidence of benevolence. No, Winifred said. Splendor became a tool. You are the person attempting to make it the whole story. The chairman called for order, but questions began from every row. Had Winifred selected the suppliers? Had she seen the accounts? Had she benefited personally from the decorations? Why had the Duke's officers not supervised the committee? Winifred answered one question and then another. Each answer required context. Each interruption stripped that context away. Nicholas remained seated beside the shortened statement, his hands closed over the arms of his chair. Winifred saw the moment his restraint began to fail. A subscriber in the third row rose without waiting for recognition. Did Her Grace ever see the accounts at all? The committee clerk pushed the shortened page toward Nicholas. Your Grace, he whispered. The room needs something decisive. Nicholas looked down. He saw that every approved reference to Winifred's direction of the benefit had been removed. He saw the sentence declaring that she bore no responsibility for the accounts. He knew exactly what it would do. Then Lady Bramwell said, If the Duchess had no knowledge of the payments, we may put this unpleasantness behind us. Nicholas stood. Rank silenced the room before truth could. The Duchess bears no responsibility for errors contained in the committee accounts, he said. Those matters belong to the officers charged with keeping and presenting the expenditure. Her Grace's role was charitable and ceremonial, not financial. Relief moved through the room. Winifred heard it in loosened breaths, settling skirts, and the soft rustle of papers lowered from defensive hands. They were willing to forgive her because Nicholas had declared her powerless. He continued, accepting responsibility under the Redbourne name and promising an examination of the accounts. But the first sentence had already done its work. Winifred closed her fan. The sound was slight. Nicholas heard it. His voice faltered. Winifred rose. Am I innocent because I am honest? She asked. Or because my husband has decided I was merely decorative? No one answered. Nicholas's face lost its practiced calm. Winifred, you were asked whether I saw the accounts. The answer is yes. You were asked whether I held authority. The answer is yes. You protected me from accusation by erasing the work that made the accusation possible. That wasn't what I intended. I know. That is why it is so dangerous. She faced the subscribers. I approved the benefit expenses. I challenged the Harbridge and Croft proposal. I requested comparative estimates that are now absent from the committee papers. If mistakes were made, I will help uncover them. If money was wrongfully claimed, I will name it. But I will not accept innocence purchased by pretending I possessed no power. Neville's expression did not change, but victory entered the stillness around him. Winifred turned to the chairman. Until an examination by persons unconnected with the disputed payments is complete, I resign as principal patroness. A wave of whispers rose. She continued over it. The examination will include 2 representatives chosen from among the widows receiving support. The original account book will remain with Mr. Pritchard. No contract should be approved while the repeated invoice remains unresolved. Neville spoke at once. The subscription cannot be left without a titled chair. The chairman looked troubled. The rules do require an interim patroness before contractual business may be called. Winifred knew the provision. Neville had counted upon it. He produced the proxy list. 5 absent patronesses had authorized votes in advance. 2 senior ladies who might have taken the chair refused, one pleading illness in the family, and the other declaring that she would not attach her name to a disputed account. Delphine rose with measured reluctance. I will accept the interim ceremonial duty if the committee requires stability. The vote was called. 17 favored Delphine, 15 opposed. Winifred did not challenge the proxies. To fight for the chair before the evidence was complete would make the chair appear to be the prize. The chairman announced Delphine's temporary appointment and scheduled the Harbridge and Croft contract vote in 6 days. Mr. Pritchard relocked the account book. The approved statement remained unread inside Nicholas's coat. Outside the meeting room, he followed Winifred only as far as the vestibule. "I broke my word," he said. "Yes, I saw the altered page. I knew it was wrong, and I chose speed. Yes, I thought if I stopped them from calling you dishonest, I could repair the rest afterward." Winifred looked at him. "You cannot restore a woman's voice after using silence to save her." He did not defend himself. "What will you do?" "I am going to Langton House." Pain crossed his face, but he did not step into her path. "For how long?" "Until I decide whether Rivington House can be my home without requiring me to disappear inside it." Lady Margaret waited beside the carriage. Winifred kept the fan closed in her hand. "I will conduct the inquiry independently. You will issue no statement about me." "I won't." "You will not ask the household to persuade me to return." "I won't." "And you will not interfere with the evidence because you cannot bear waiting." Nicholas met her eyes. "I won't." The carriage door opened. He did not offer his hand. That restraint was the only tenderness she could accept from him. Winifred entered without assistance and gave the order for Langton House. As the carriage turned toward Cavendish Square, Delphine remained behind with a title she had won by 15 voices, 5 proxies, and 1 husband's broken promise. 6 days remained before the contract vote. By the morning of May 29, Langton House had become the first room in London where the disputed accounts of the Redbourne widows' subscription were being examined by women who had depended upon them. Winifred had invited Mrs. Eleanor Price and Mrs. Judith Crane, both recipients of the fund, and both chosen by the widows themselves, to sit with Mrs. Vale, Mr. Pritchard, and the family solicitor. No one was placed according to rank. Mrs. Price and Mrs. Crane occupied the chairs nearest the table because Winifred wanted every figure read by someone who understood what a delayed allowance meant beyond the language of accounts. Mr. Pritchard brought the original account book in its locked leather case. He opened it himself and retained possession throughout. Mrs. Vale brought signed copies of the 2 printers' proofs, while the originals remained secured in the iron chest at her Fleet Street shop. The red-cued score and the actual opening night program remained sealed at Lincoln's Inn under the solicitor's custody. Nothing important had been moved merely because another room was more convenient. "In Vover, 317, Mrs. Crane said, placing one copied charge beside another. "The same number appears twice." Mr. Pritchard turned the account book toward the light. "Yes, one entry is for supper linen and hired serving tables," Mrs. Price said. "The second describes the same service under a different sum." "Could the number have been copied incorrectly?" Mrs. Vale asked. "It could have been," Mr. Pritchard replied, "but the merchant's own papers should settle that." The solicitor opened a packet delivered that morning from Cheapside. Inside lay a signed receipt from the supplier, who had furnished the linen and tables for Harbridge and Croft. Payment had been made in full on May 1. The merchant denied issuing any second demand. The solicitor read the statement aloud, then placed it beside the duplicated invoice. "The first charge was settled," he said. "The later demand used the same number for a service already paid." Mrs. Price looked from the receipt to the audit sheet that had named the expense as Winifred's personal extravagance. Then if anyone discovered the second charge, they would believe her grace had spent the money twice. "That appears to have been the intention," Winifred said. Mrs. Price's mouth tightened. "That sum would cover my rent allowance for months." Mrs. Crane touched the figure with one finger. "And Mrs. Hughes's coal. And the morning payment due to Mrs. Allen." Winifred had known the arithmetic. Hearing the women name what the money meant gave the fraud a different weight. Neville had not merely tried to disgrace a duchess. He had placed winter rent, fuel, and burial dignity beneath the same false heading. The solicitor opened a second packet. This one contained the creditor schedule relating to Harbridge and Croft. Neville Mallory had guaranteed part of the firm's borrowing. If the 3-year contract passed, the creditor would extend repayment and release him from an immediate demand of £2,000. If it failed, payment would be required before the end of the month. Mrs. Crane read the date. "That is why the vote was set so quickly." "Yes," Winifred said. "He needed the contract before the demand fell due." Mrs. Vale looked toward the signed copy of the altered printer's proof, and Lady Delphine needed to look as though she already possessed the authority to support it. "The program created the appearance," Winifred replied. "The rehearsal made the appearance public. The audit sheet removed the person most likely to stop the vote." Mr. Pritchard closed the account book halfway, leaving his hand upon it. "This is sufficient to postpone the contract, but not to prove who prepared the second demand." "Then we do not claim more than we know," Winifred said. "The merchant's receipt proves duplicate billing. The creditor's schedule proves Lord Mallory's motive. The clerk in Harbridge and Croft must still account for the paper itself." Mrs. Price looked at Winifred. "Will the allowances be paid?" "Yes. The committee cannot suspend them without a formal vote, and Mr. Pritchard has confirmed no such vote occurred." Relief softened the older woman's face. It did not erase her anger. "Then I'll tell the others. They should not have had to fear their landlords because fine people were arguing over flowers." "No," Winifred said. "They should not." A footman entered and presented a card upon a silver tray. The Duke of Redbourne had called. There was no message written across the card, no request that marriage should grant him immediate entry, and no appeal to urgency. A formal call. Winifred looked toward Lady Margaret, who sat near the window as companion. Lady Margaret gave the smallest nod. "Show his Grace into the smaller drawing-room," Winifred said. "Tell him I will join him when this examination is adjourned." Nicholas waited nearly 40 minutes. When Winifred entered, he rose from the chair beside the cold hearth. He carried no papers. He did not cross the room. "Thank you for receiving me. You followed the proper form. I am beginning to understand that form can protect choice when rank threatens to replace it." Winifred remained near the door. "Why are you here?" "To apologize without asking you to make the apology comfortable for me." She said nothing. Nicholas continued. "At Hanover Square Rooms, I saw that the shortened statement was not the one you approved. I knew it removed your authority. I read it anyway because the room frightened me, and I wanted the accusation stopped before it reached you again." His voice remained steady. "I chose speed over consent. I broke a direct promise. I made you smaller because I believed a smaller woman would be easier to defend." The precision of the words reached farther than regret alone could have done. "You did not only interrupt me," Winifred said. "You taught the room how to dismiss me." "Yes, they relaxed when you said I had no responsibility. I heard them. They were willing to forgive me, because they believed I had done nothing." Nicholas lowered his gaze for one moment. "I know. No, you know now, because I have told you. In that room you chose not to know." He accepted the distinction. "Yes." Winifred crossed toward the window. "I will not return to Rivington House because you have found the correct words. I am not asking you to. You will not come tomorrow with a better apology. I will not. You will not tell society that our separation is temporary, private, or misunderstood. I will say nothing about it unless you permit me." Nicholas took one step forward, then stopped. He opened his hand between them, palm upward. He did not reach for her. The gesture offered no demand and no destination. Winifred looked at his hand for several breaths. Then she crossed the remaining distance and placed her gloved fingers into his palm. Nicholas did not close his hand at once. He waited until she curled her fingers around his. Only then did his own fingers settle gently over hers. The contact lasted in silence. He did not pull her nearer. He did not turn comfort into reconciliation. Winifred felt the warmth through her glove and the effort it cost him to hold only what she had chosen to give. "I do not forgive you yet," she said. "No, this does not mean I am returning." "I know. Do not say you understand if you intend to ask again tomorrow. I will not ask until you invite the question." Winifred kept her hand in his for one more moment, then withdrew it. Nicholas released her immediately. "The inquiry found duplicate billing," she said. "The creditor's schedule confirms Neville's interest in the contract." "What do you need from me?" The wording mattered. Not what shall I do, not what authority shall I use. What do you need? "The vote is due in 3 days," Winifred said. "Use the committee rules to delay it. On what ground?" "Unresolved merchant papers and a duplicated demand. The chairman may postpone contractual business until the accounts are examined." "I can secure that. Without a public statement, yes. Without declaring me innocent, distressed, ill, absent, or under your protection. Payne crossed his face, but he did not resist. Yes, and without confronting Neville before the solicitor has every statement required. Exactly as you ask. Winifred studied him. Then do that. Nicholas bowed. At the door he paused. There is something I almost said at Hanover Square. What? That I need you. Her breath caught, but he did not turn the admission into a plea. I did not say it because need can become another claim when spoken by a man who has already taken too much choice. He bowed again and left. Winifred remained near the window until his carriage moved away from Cavendish Square. Then the solicitor entered from the adjoining room, carrying a fresh note. Mr. Sorrel wished to amend his account. Neville Mallory had visited him after the opening ball and offered 20 guineas if he could obtain the red-cued score and burn it. On May 31, Mr. Sorrel entered the solicitor's chambers at Lincoln's Inn, knowing that the score he had been paid to mark lay sealed in the same building, and that he would not be permitted to see it again before giving his evidence. A commissioner for oaths sat at the end of the long table, with the family solicitor beside him and 2 clerks ready to witness every signature. Winifred occupied the chair nearest the window. Mrs. Vale sat to her left while Mrs. Price and Mrs. Crane had been invited to remain because the money at issue belonged to a subscription created in their name. Nicholas stood behind an empty chair and did not sit until Winifred indicated that he might. The red-cued score remained locked in a cabinet in a separate room. The actual opening night program remained sealed in its own packet beside it. Neither object was brought out merely to make the proceedings dramatic. You asked to amend your account, Winifred said. Mr. Sorrel clasped his hat between both hands. Yes, Your Grace. Then begin with what you omitted. He swallowed. After the ball, Lord Mallory came to my rooms. He offered me 20 guineas if I could obtain the score from Mr. Bell and burn it. Mrs. Crane drew a sharp breath. Winifred's expression did not change. Did he say why? He said the marking might be misunderstood by people who didn't know how musical entrances were arranged. Did he ask you to deny Lady Delphine attended the rehearsal? Yes. He said I should claim the direction had been added after the ball. Nicholas's hand tightened once against the chair back, then released. What did you answer? Winifred asked. I told him the score was already in the steward's custody. I did not tell him I intended to speak. Shame passed over Mr. Sorrel's face. I was frightened. Fear explains delay, Winifred said. It doesn't make the first omission harmless. No, Your Grace. The commissioner asked Mr. Sorrel to repeat the facts slowly. The conductor stated that Neville Mallory had paid an additional 5 guineas for the May 15 rehearsal, that Lady Delphine had been present, that the red instruction had been written before the ball, and that Neville later offered 20 guineas for the score to be destroyed. He then read the deposition from beginning to end. Do you swear that this account is true? The commissioner asked. I do, Mr. Sorrel signed. The commissioner administered the oath, added his attestation, and passed the deposition to the solicitor. No one applauded his courage. Winifred would not allow late honesty to become a performance that erased earlier obedience. The committee clerk was called next. He entered without Neville beside him, and looked younger than he had at Hanover Square Rooms. He admitted that Neville had supplied the supposed verbal authority for Delphine's appointment. He admitted sending the altered program instruction to Mrs. Vale, arranging the private rehearsal, and passing the additional fee to Mr. Sorrel. Did His Grace ever instruct you to replace my name? Winifred asked. No, Your Grace. Did he authorize Lady Delphine to act as principal patroness? No. Then why did you say he had? The clerk looked toward Nicholas. Nicholas did not rescue him. Lord Mallory repeated His Grace's remark from the committee supper. He said the Duke wished Lady Delphine to have whatever public part she desired. A wish you never confirmed. No. Who gave you the headings for the audit sheet? Lord Mallory. Who read them before the sheet went to the printer? The clerk's face lost what little color remained. Lady Delphine. Did she alter anything? She said the word personal must remain. She said people understand vanity more quickly than accounts. Mrs. Price looked down at her hands. Mrs. Crane did not. And the repeated invoice, Winifred asked. I copied it from papers Lord Mallory supplied. I didn't prepare the merchant demand. You will provide every paper, note, and instruction, still in your possession. I will. You won't destroy anything because it embarrasses you. No, Your Grace. The clerk read and signed his deposition before the commissioner. When he had gone, the solicitor placed both sworn statements beside the merchant receipt and creditor schedule. These will be laid before a magistrate, he said. The score and opening night program will remain sealed here. The magistrate may later require them, but they will not be moved without a written record. Winifred nodded. And Mrs. Vale's original proofs remain at her shop. Yes, only signed copies accompany these papers. Nicholas looked at the growing file. Is this sufficient for a warrant? It may be sufficient to begin formal consideration, the solicitor replied. The magistrate will decide. We should not assume the result. Then we won't, Winifred said. That afternoon, Nicholas called at Langton House carrying one leather portfolio. He sent his card first and waited until Lady Margaret had taken her place in the adjoining room. When Winifred entered the smaller drawing room, he rose and placed the portfolio upon the table without opening it. I found your February memorandum. Winifred stopped. Where? In the lower drawer of my political correspondence desk. It had been filed beneath papers concerning Austria. He opened the portfolio. The original memorandum lay inside, intact. Nicholas's initial marked the first page. The appendix comparing Harbridge and Croft with other suppliers remained unmarked. You read the first page, Winifred said. Yes, and not the appendix, no. Yet you remembered the matter as attended to. Yes. He did not explain the workload of a duke or the distraction of foreign affairs. I thought the ballroom was where I failed you. It was only where the failure became visible. Winifred looked at the figures she had written months earlier. You failed before Delphine entered the room. I know, before the program was altered. Yes, before Neville needed your joke. Nicholas accepted each sentence. This belongs with the solicitor, she said. I have already prepared a note stating where I found it and what I failed to read. I'll sign it before the commissioner if required. You'll give the original, not a copy. Yes, and you won't use the admission to ask for forgiveness. No. He closed the portfolio and left it on the table for her to direct. Winifred crossed to the writing desk, where a fresh plan of the Rivington ballroom waited. The contract vote has been delayed, she said. I intend to invite the committee and principal subscribers back to Rivington House on June 8th. Nicholas studied the marked doors and corridors. A reconstruction, a public accounting. Mrs. Vale enters through the west corridor. Mr. Pritchard comes through the library passage with the account book. The solicitor brings the sealed score and the separate sealed program from Lincoln's Inn. Mr. Sorrel waits in the music room. The clerk remains apart until called. What would you have me do? Arrange room security and the witness entrances. Nothing else. No questioning, no public statement. Not unless I approve it. And if Neville provokes me? You remember that provocation is how he has moved you since February. Nicholas met her eyes. I'll remember. His right cuff had folded beneath the sleeve of his coat. Before she could decide against the impulse, Winifred stepped closer and straightened it with two careful fingers. Nicholas went still. He did not catch her hand or turn the small gesture into a claim. Winifred smoothed the edge once and withdrew. Do this exactly as I ask, she said, and not more. Exactly as you ask. A footman entered with a card from Mallory House. Delphine had accepted the June 8 invitation. Beneath the formal reply, she had added one sentence. I trust Her Grace has chosen at last to make the apology the room is owed. Winifred read it and handed it to Nicholas. She believes I've invited her to surrender. Nicholas returned the card without comment. Winifred looked toward the ballroom plan. Then let her come expecting to receive one. Nicholas asked to confess, before Winifred presented a single piece of evidence. And the request frightened her more than another polished defense would have done. On June 4, the final plan for the gathering at Rivington House covered the drawing-room table at Langton House. Every witness had been assigned a separate entrance. Every document had a named custodian. Every question had been in an order that would prevent rank, outrage, or sentiment from replacing proof. Winifred stood beside the table with a pencil in her hand. Nicholas remained opposite her, reading the sequence without touching the papers. The family solicitor sat near the window with the original February memorandum now secured inside his case. "The first fact is your remark at the committee supper," Winifred said. Then Mrs. Vale's approved proof and the altered printer's proof. After that, the actual program used by the master of ceremonies. Nicholas followed the line with his eyes. Then the score. Yes, the program proves the substitution reached the ballroom. The score proves the entrance was rehearsed. Neither alone proves the entire purpose. The audit sheet follows. Only after the room understands how Delphine acquired the appearance of authority. Then Mr. Pritchard presents the entries as they appear in the original account book. The merchant receipt proves invoice 317 had already been paid. The creditor schedule establishes Neville's motive. Nicholas looked toward the marked eastern door on the ballroom plan. And Delphine? She will be asked whether she attended the rehearsal. She'll deny it. Probably. The conductor and clerk can contradict her. Not immediately. I want the room to see what she knows before a witness tells them what she did. Nicholas studied Winifred's face. You expect her to reveal something. I expect pride to make silence difficult. The solicitor closed his notebook. The sworn depositions, merchant receipt, creditor schedule, and Lord Mallory's attempt to obtain the score have been placed before a magistrate. He is considering whether the evidence supports formal process. Nicholas turned toward him. Will a warrant be issued? It may be. It may not. That decision belongs to the magistrate. And if it is issued before the 8th, 2 constables can attend discreetly outside the public rooms. They will not enter the ballroom unless the warrant is served or evidence is threatened. Winifred nodded. The gathering must not resemble a private court conducted by a duchess. It will not, the solicitor said. The subscription may examine its own accounts and reject its own contract. Any criminal allegation remains for the law. Nicholas looked down at the plan again. Then I should speak before the evidence begins. Winifred's pencil stopped. Why? Because Neville and Delphine will use my words as their defense. If I wait until they are exposed, my admission will sound like a duke abandoning people who have become inconvenient. What do you intend to admit? The jest, the memorandum I did not read, the statement at Hanover Square Rooms. Nothing about my feelings. Nothing. You will not explain what I meant when I bowed. No. You will not tell the room that you acted from love. His expression changed, but his answer did not. No. And if the truth damages your political standing, I will still tell it. If London calls you careless, it will be accurate. If I do not return to you afterward? The question settled between them. Nicholas did not answer quickly enough to make it easy, nor slowly enough to suggest calculation. I will still tell it. Winifred held his gaze. Why? Because the truth is not a bargain I can offer in exchange for my wife. The solicitor lowered his eyes to the papers, granting them privacy without leaving the room. Nicholas reached inside his coat and withdrew a folded statement. He placed it on the table. I wrote this yesterday. Winifred opened it. The language was elegant. Nicholas admitted errors of judgment, failures of communication, and distress caused to her grace. He took responsibility while arranging every sentence so that no one could accuse him of deliberate neglect. It was dignified, controlled, and almost useless. This protects your reputation, she said. Yes. It says you misunderstood. Yes. It does not say you broke your word after recognizing the statement had been changed. No. It does not say you benefited from society seeing my work as effortless. Nicholas looked at the page. No. Why bring it to me? Because I wanted you to see what I would have said if I were still trying to perform repentance, rather than practice it. He took the statement back. It is very accomplished. That is why I knew it was false. He tore the page once, then again. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. He did not carry the pieces to the fire. Instead, he placed them before the solicitor. Keep these with the other papers. I do not want destruction mistaken for honesty. The solicitor gathered the torn pieces and sealed them in a small envelope. Winifred turned the ballroom plan toward Nicholas. Then listen carefully. I will open the gathering. You will speak only after I acknowledge you. Agreed. You will name your own actions. You will not defend me, interpret me, or ask the room to forgive either of us. Agreed. When you finish, you will step aside. Yes, you will not question Delphine or Neville. Nicholas's jaw tightened. Agreed. You will not interrupt if Delphine insults me. If she threatens you, house officers may intervene only for physical danger, an attempt to seize evidence, or an attempt to interfere with a witness. And if the room turns against you, you will allow me to see it. Nicholas drew a slow breath. I understand. No, you understand that you will dislike it. Yes, do you also understand that dislike is not permission? His gaze remained steady. I do. Winifred set down the pencil. The final plan lay complete between them. Nicholas had been given 3 duties: secure the house, protect the witnesses, and tell the truth. None allowed him to control the outcome. He seemed to recognize that fact at the same moment she did. You have left me very little to command, he said. I have left you something harder: obedience, restraint. For the first time, a trace of his familiar wit approached his expression. It did not become a joke. He let it pass. The solicitor collected the plan copies and withdrew to the adjoining room, leaving the door partly open. Nicholas moved toward the hearth, but stopped before reaching it. There is something I must say before we stand in that ballroom. You have already said enough for one afternoon. Not this. Winifred waited. My greatest fear is not that you will remain at Langton House. His voice was quieter now. It is that you will remember me as a man who made every room laugh whenever listening might have required courage. The words held no polish. I used wit because seriousness creates obligation. If I admitted the weight of your work, I would have had to change how I lived beside you. If I admitted how much your regard mattered to me, I might have learned that courtesy was all you felt. Winifred's fingers tightened around the pencil. You could have asked. I know. You could have listened before the ballroom. I know. And you are not entitled to comfort because you have finally named the fear. I know that too. He remained where he was. I am not asking you to forgive me. Then what are you asking? Nicholas's hands stayed at his sides. May I hold you? The question entered the room without command, promise, or bargain. Winifred looked at the man who had once believed a public gesture could restore what had been publicly taken. Now he offered no gesture at all. He waited for hers. Trust had not returned whole. It existed in smaller things: a formal calling card, an open palm, a task completed without display, a cuff he had allowed her to straighten without turning tenderness into possession. Winifred crossed the carpet. Nicholas did not move until she reached him. Then she placed her arms around him. His breath left slowly. He held her with careful strength, one hand resting at her upper back and the other between her shoulders. He did not draw her closer than she had chosen to stand. Winifred rested her cheek against his coat and listened to the steady beat beneath it. The embrace did not erase Hanover Square rooms. It did not promise a shared bed or an easy return. It gave them one honest moment in which he did not direct and she did not defend. Winifred stepped back first. Nicholas released her at once. I will return to Rivington House on June 7th, she said. Hope crossed his face, then steadied. For the gathering, yes, I will use the East Chamber. The household will be told the arrangement is yours. You will not call it reconciliation. I won't. After June 8th, I will decide what follows. Nicholas bowed his head. You will decide. On June 7, Winifred's carriage stopped before Rivington House shortly after 4 o'clock. Nicholas waited inside the entrance hall, rather than upon the steps, where society might have mistaken her arrival for a marital tableau. He welcomed her with a bow and made no attempt to take her hand. Winifred answered with one of her own, then carried the key to the East Chamber past him herself. The following evening, the same ballroom that had watched her beau would be asked to watch the truth stand upright. The ballroom had been arranged to remember everything. On the evening of June 8, the eastern doors stood open beneath the musicians' gallery. The receiving line occupied its original position, and 300 candles reflected from the same gilt mirrors that had watched Winifred bow. Yet the room no longer resembled a celebration. No flowers softened the walls, no supper doors stood open, no principal patroness wore a badge of office. A plain table had been placed at the center of the floor, bearing only the subscription's generic committee insignia and enough space for the evidence that would be shown. Winifred stood at the head of the receiving line in deep gray silk, her black fan open in one hand. The unfinished silver crescent rested beneath her thumb. Nicholas remained several paces away, neither beside her nor before her. He had followed every instruction Mrs. Vale entered through the west corridor, carrying a protective folder that contained the approved printer's proof and the altered printer's proof. She retained both originals in her own hands. Mr. Pritchard came through the library passage with the original account book locked in its leather case. The family solicitor arrived from the private hall bearing two separately sealed exhibits from Lincoln's Inn: the red-cued score and the actual program used by the Master of Ceremonies on May 18. Mr. Sorrel waited in the music room. The committee clerk remained in a separate antechamber under a house officer's observation. No witness met another before being called. No document lay beyond the reach of its lawful custodian. Before the first guest entered, the solicitor approached Winifred quietly. "The magistrate has issued the warrant," he said. "2 constables are waiting beyond the public rooms. They won't enter unless I identify Lord Mallory and formally require service." "On what grounds?" "Suspected conspiracy to defraud, obtaining money by false pretenses, and the attempt to suppress the score. The ballroom is not to become a court. It won't. The subscription may examine its accounts. The law will act separately." Winifred inclined her head. Nicholas heard the exchange but asked no question. Delphine arrived carrying a small velvet case beside her reticule. The unique silver-blue rosette remained inside it. She wore pale blue silk but no badge. Neville entered moments later with a leather document case beneath one arm, and the confidence of a man who believed rank would make everyone hesitate before naming him. His eyes moved from the central table to the solicitor's sealed exhibits. For the first time that evening his expression changed. "Your Grace," Delphine said to Winifred, "I had hoped this gathering might restore proportion to what was, at worst, an unfortunate misunderstanding. Then you'll welcome an exact account of how it occurred." Delphine's smile thinned. The principal subscribers took their places along the walls. Mrs. Price and Mrs. Crane sat in the first row with the other widow representatives. There was no raised platform and no central chair for Nicholas. Winifred had removed every arrangement, suggesting that truth began wherever rank sat highest. When the doors closed, she stepped into the open space. 3 weeks ago, this room witnessed a public substitution, she said. A program named Lady Delphine Mallory, principal patroness, by the appointment of His Grace. The orchestra delayed its opening measures. Lady Delphine entered at the exact moment required to occupy my position before the room understood what had changed. Tonight, the subscription will examine how that appearance was created and how its accounts were later used to defend it. This is not a criminal trial. Questions of law belong to the magistrate. Questions of this charity's governance belong to those whose money and names were placed at risk. Neville gave a short laugh, a careful distinction after inviting half of London to watch. Winifred looked at him. "You object to witnesses." He did not answer. Nicholas met Winifred's gaze from across the room. He waited. Only when she gave the smallest nod did he step forward. "Before any evidence is presented," he said, "the room must hear what I did." A stillness moved outward from him. Delphine's attention sharpened. Nicholas did not look toward her. At a committee supper in February, Lord Mallory suggested that Lady Delphine should be given a more visible part in the subscription. I replied that she might have whatever part kept the subscribers amused. I intended to end a tiresome conversation. I did not appoint her to any office. A few faces turned toward Neville. Nicholas continued, "That distinction does not excuse me. A duke's careless words are often treated as permission by people who depend upon his favor. I knew that, and I spoke carelessly anyway." Winifred watched him resist the old instinct to soften the room. "My wife had already objected to the Harbridge and Croft proposal. I initialed the first page of her memorandum and failed to read the appendix. I allowed myself to remember the matter as attended to. At Hanover Square Rooms, I made the failure worse. I had promised not to issue any statement about Her Grace without her approval. When the room turned hostile, I read a shortened version I knew she had not approved. I declared that she bore no responsibility for the committee accounts because I wished to silence an accusation against her. His voice did not rise. I protected her by erasing her authority. I taught society to see her labor as decoration, and others used the lesson I had provided. Delphine shifted. "Nicholas, you're making yourself guilty to flatter your wife." He did not answer. Winifred did. "His Grace has named his conduct. You'll have the same opportunity." Nicholas stepped aside exactly as promised. He neither reclaimed the center nor looked to Winifred for approval. Mrs. Vale came forward at Winifred's invitation. She placed the protective folder upon the table, but kept one hand on it as she opened the cover. First, she displayed the approved printer's proof dated May 8. Winifred's name appeared as principal patroness. Delphine stood among the honorary subscribers. Then Mrs. Vale revealed the altered printer's proof, dated May 12, where Delphine had replaced Winifred and the words "by the appointment of His Grace" had been added. "Did the altered instruction bear the Duke's signature?" Winifred asked. "No, Your Grace." "His seal?" "No." "Any direction from Rivington House?" "None." "Who delivered it?" "The committee clerk. He said Lord Mallory possessed verbal approval." Neville looked at the printer. "A widow's memory is not authority." Mrs. Vale opened her daybook. "Then perhaps my written entry will serve. I recorded the clerk's words at the hour he delivered the change." The committee clerk was brought in and stood before the table. He confirmed that Neville had cited Nicholas's remark as verbal authority. He admitted sending the altered wording to Mrs. Vale and arranging the special rehearsal. "Did His Grace ever instruct you to replace my name?" Winifred asked. "No, Your Grace." "Did Lady Delphine approve the wording?" The clerk glanced toward her. "Yes." Delphine lifted her chin. "I was told Nicholas wished it." "You were told by your brother," Winifred said. "Did you ask His Grace?" "No. Did you ask me?" "You would have objected." The admission passed through the room like a draft beneath a door. Winifred allowed the silence to remain. Then she turned to the solicitor. He displayed the seal upon the packet, containing the actual opening night program, and broke it before the assembled witnesses. The Master of Ceremonies read aloud the line he had announced on May 18. "Lady Delphine Mallory, principal patroness by the appointment of His Grace." The solicitor returned the program to its packet, then displayed and opened the separately sealed score. Mr. Sorrel entered from the music room and identified the red notation beside the opening quadrille. "Hold 3 bars. Lady D receives the bow." "Play the passage as originally written," Winifred said. The orchestra began. Without the delay, the music moved cleanly through the entrance. "Now follow the read instruction." The musicians repeated the opening. At Mr. Sorrel's signal, the melody stopped. 1 bar passed, then another, then the third. Every face turned toward the eastern doors. The Master of Ceremonies repeated Delphine's altered announcement. The room saw the path she had crossed, the place Winifred had occupied, and the silence deliberately created so that no one could miss the bow. Delphine's composure hardened. "This proves only that an entrance was arranged." "You said the incident was a misunderstanding," Winifred replied. "A patroness may rehearse an entrance." "Were you present at the rehearsal?" "No." Mr. looked at her but did not speak. The clerk lowered his eyes. Winifred closed her fan. "Then you cannot know how the timing was measured." Delphine gave a small, strained smile. "I know only that the conductor has repeated it inaccurately." "In what way?" "He stopped 1 bar too early." The words left her before caution could reclaim them. No one moved. Mr. Sorrel slowly turned toward her. Winifred's fan remained closed in her hand. 1 bar too early," she repeated. A precise correction from a woman who claimed she was never at the rehearsal. Delphine did not answer at once. The silence that followed her mistake spread through the ballroom with greater force than any accusation. Mr. Sorrel stood beside the open score, his face pale but steady. The solicitor retained one hand upon the portfolio. Winifred remained at the center of the room with her fan closed. "You corrected the timing," she said. "How could you know it was wrong if you were never present?" Delphine lifted her chin. Anyone with an ear for music could hear the pause was awkward. "You did not say the pause was awkward. You said the conductor stopped 1 bar too early." Winifred turned toward Mr. Sorrel. "Was Lady Delphine present on May 15th? "Yes, Your Grace." His voice carried clearly. "She entered through the eastern doors 3 times. She asked me to hold the music until the Master of Ceremonies completed the altered announcement." Delphine's composure cracked. "You were paid to play, not interpret." "I was paid 5 guineas beyond my contracted fee," Mr. Sorrel replied. "Lord Mallory arranged it through the committee clerk. After the ball, he offered me 20 more if I could obtain the score and burn it." A murmur moved through the subscribers. Neville stepped forward. "A frightened musician will say anything to protect his position." The solicitor raised the sworn deposition. Mr. Sorrel gave this account before a commissioner for oaths on May 31st. The receipt for the rehearsal fee and the record of Lord Mallory's later offer have been submitted to the magistrate. Neville's attention shifted toward the outer doors. Winifred saw the calculation, but she did not allow it to alter her order. "Mrs. Vale," she said. The printer brought forward the signed copy of the mercer's memorandum. "1 silver blue committee. Rosette," Winifred read. "Ordered by Lord Mallory on May 13th and delivered to Lady Delphine Mallory." Every eye turned toward the small velvet case beside Delphine's reticule. The case remained closed. The unique rosette had not yet left her possession. "The altered proof came on May 12th, Winifred continued. "The rosette was ordered the next day. The rehearsal followed 2 days later. None of those acts occurred after a misunderstanding. They prepared the misunderstanding." Delphine's hand moved toward the velvet case but stopped. "I believed Nicholas wished me to take a visible part." "You did not ask him. He had already spoken. You did not ask me." Delphine's expression hardened. "You would have refused." "Yes." The answer unsettled the room more than denial would have done. Winifred took 1 step closer. "You knew the office was mine, knew I would object, and proceeded before I could speak. What did you believe the bow would prove?" Delphine looked toward Nicholas. He did not answer for her. He did not move. "London had always understood that I possessed influence with him," she said. "Before your marriage, invitations came because people knew I could reach him. Afterward, hostesses began treating me as though I had become an embarrassment they were too polite to name. And the false appointment was meant to restore that influence. It was meant to show that a title is not the same as importance." The words escaped in anger rather than triumph. Winifred held her gaze. "My title was not what you tried to steal. You took work you had not performed and authority you had not earned." Delphine said nothing. Neville stepped between them. "This spectacle has gone far enough. My sister accepted a charitable role because the subscription required vigor. Whatever mistakes were made in the program have no bearing upon the accounts." "Then let us examine the accounts," Winifred said. Mr. Pritchard unlocked his leather case and opened the original account book while keeping it beneath his own hand. He read the entries for flowers, musicians, supper service, and hired carriages. None appeared as Winifred's personal expenditure. Mrs. Vale displayed the audit sheet that had placed those genuine figures beneath the altered heading. The committee clerk, still standing near the table, spoke before Winifred asked. Lord Mallory supplied the headings. Lady Delphine read them before the sheet went to the printer. She said the word personal must remain because people understand vanity more quickly than accounts. Delphine turned upon him. "You're trying to save yourself." "I am telling what I did," he said. "You should do the same." Mr. Pritchard then placed the copied invoices upon the table. Both bore the number 317. The solicitor read the merchant's receipt, confirming that the supper linen and hired serving tables had been paid in full on May 1st. The later demand used the same number for a service already settled. Mrs. Price rose from the first row. That second sum would have covered months of rent allowances. Mrs. Crane stood beside her, and coal for women who received letters warning that their payments might be delayed because her grace had spent the money on flowers. The accusation could no longer hide inside arithmetic. Winifred turned to Neville. "Why did Harbridge and Croft's survival matter to you? Their stability mattered to the subscription." The solicitor opened the creditor schedule. Lord Mallory guaranteed part of the firm's borrowing. If the 3-year contract passed, His creditor agreed to extend repayment and release him from an immediate demand of £2,000. If it failed, payment fell due before the end of May. Neville's face changed, only slightly but enough. "A private arrangement," he said. "A private arrangement that required public authority," Winifred replied. "You needed my objection removed." The altered program made Delphine appear appointed. The rehearsal made the room accept her before it could question her. The audit sheet made my refusal look like vanity and misuse. Then the contract vote was advanced before your creditor's demand. You imagine yourself at the center of everything. No, the widows were at the center. That is what you failed to understand. Winifred gestured toward Mrs. Price and Mrs. Crane. You risked their rent, fuel, and dignity because you believed charity was a purse managed by people too polite to examine your hand. Neville's control slipped. I was rescuing the subscription from an incompetent duchess who turned benevolence into theater. If you meant to rescue it, Winifred asked, why did rescue require rehearsing my humiliation? No answer came. Nicholas remained where Winifred had told him to stand. Delphine turned toward him in desperation. You gave us the opening. You said I could have whatever part I wished. Nicholas answered without stepping forward. I said something careless and vain. I did not appoint you. I did not authorize you to take my wife's work, falsify her authority, or help your brother submit a second demand against charitable funds. You allowed society to believe I still mattered to you. I allowed ambiguity because I lacked courage. That failure is mine. What you chose to do with it is yours. The distinction left Delphine without refuge. Neville seized the leather document case he had brought and closed his hand around its handle. The proposed contract is my property until signed. The solicitor stepped forward. The papers in that case have been identified as material to an inquiry already placed before the magistrate. You are formally required to leave them. Neville turned toward the doors. You have no authority to detain me. I do not, the solicitor replied. The magistrate does. He gave a signal. The outer doors opened, and 2 constables entered from the hall. They did not rush or surround Neville. One presented the warrant. Neville Mallory, Earl of Mallory, you are required to answer allegations concerning conspiracy to defraud, obtaining money by false pretenses, and attempted suppression of evidence. The second constable took possession of the document case after Neville released it. No struggle followed. Neville looked toward Nicholas, perhaps expecting ducal intervention. Nicholas did not move. The constables escorted Neville from the ballroom under lawful process. The doors closed behind them. Delphine stood alone beside the central table. Winifred looked toward the velvet case. The rosette was never yours by right. Delphine's fingers trembled as she opened the case. The silver-blue rosette lay inside, intact. Will you have me seized as well? No. You will surrender what was falsely made to appear in office. Then you will leave by the front door before the same witnesses who saw you enter. Delphine removed the unique rosette from the velvet case and placed it upon the central table once. No one touched it. She lifted her chin and crossed the ballroom without music, announcement, or escort. The front doors opened. She passed through them, carrying only her reticule and the closed, empty case. When the doors shut, the chairman rose. The Harbridge and Croft proposal was rejected without dissent. All disputed payments were suspended pending the proper examination. Then the chairman turned to Winifred. Your Grace, will you resume leadership of the subscription? Winifred looked toward Mrs. Price and Mrs. Crane. Not under the former arrangement. There will be no single principal patroness whose social rank can be mistaken for unchecked authority. Mrs. Price and Mrs. Crane will have a full voice and vote upon the committee. Accounts will be printed quarterly. Expenditure will be examined by persons unconnected with the disputed payments. No ceremonial office will carry financial power merely because society finds one name more convenient than another. Silence filled the ballroom. It was not the silence of humiliation. It was the silence of people discovering that justice would require them to surrender habits from which they had benefited. Mrs. Price stood first. I accept. Mrs. Crane followed. So do I. The chairman bowed. Then the subscription will be reformed accordingly. Before the room dispersed, every object returned to its custodian. Mrs. Vale closed the protective folder around the two original printer's proofs, signed an acknowledgment that they remained her property, and left for Fleet Street with Lady Margaret beside her. The solicitor resealed the red-queued score and the actual opening night program in separate packets for return to Lincoln's Inn. Mr. Pritchard relocked the account book and kept its key. The silver-blue rosette was sealed in a committee envelope for the subscription archive. Nothing remained upon the table except the plain insignia of an office that would never again belong to one woman alone. Winifred opened her black silk fan. The unfinished crescent caught the candlelight. Nicholas waited until she inclined her head toward the private antechamber. Once inside, he left the door partly open to the corridor and remained several feet away. "You told the truth before you knew what it would cost you," Winifred said. "I should have done it long before tonight." "Yes," he accepted the answer. "I am not asking you to return to me." "Good." Nicholas drew a breath. "But will not hide this behind courtesy any longer. I love you, Winifred. I loved your grace while refusing to understand the labor beneath it. I will not make that failure again." The words carried no request for reward. Winifred crossed the space between them. "I love you, Nicholas, but I choose the man who told the truth tonight, not the title that once tried to speak for me." His eyes closed for one brief moment. When they opened, restraint remained. "May I kiss you?" "Yes." Winifred lifted her hand to his face and touched his cheek. She raised her chin. Nicholas kissed her gently, waiting within the contact until she answered. Winifred moved closer and returned the kiss freely. When they parted, she kept her hand against his face and slipped her other arm around him. Nicholas held her without tightening his embrace beyond what she gave. "Tomorrow," he said, his forehead resting lightly against hers. "What hour may I call at Langton House?" 3 o'clock. "I'll be there." Outside the antechamber, the ballroom waited for them to return and receive its approval. They did not. By December, the first winter notice of the reformed Redbourne widow's subscription was being set in type at Mrs. Vale's shop near Fleet Street, and no title appeared above the women whose lives the charity served. The heading read Patronesses and Elected Representatives. Beneath it, Mrs. Eleanor Price and Mrs. Judith Crane stood beside the names of duchesses, countesses, merchants' widows, and parish delegates with equal voting rights. Winifred examined the proof at the long work table while the press moved steadily beyond the partition. Mrs. Price leaned over the page and touched one line with the blunt end of a pencil. "Mrs. Crane's second name needs an E." Mrs. Crane adjusted her spectacles. "It always does, and people always decide it doesn't." Mrs. Vale marked the correction. "It will be right before the next impression." Winifred smiled. "That is the purpose of a proof. Not to preserve the first mistake, but to correct it before the mistake becomes authority." The women exchanged a look that held memory without bitterness. 6 months earlier, another printer's proof had removed Winifred's name and helped build a lie large enough for a ballroom. Now the same shop printed quarterly accounts, supplier comparisons, and minutes that any subscriber could request. No ceremonial patroness possessed private financial power. Every contract required 3 written estimates and examination by members unconnected with the proposed supplier. The first reformed agreement for coal, mourning cloth, and winter rent assistance lay beside the notice. Harbridge and Croft had not been invited to bid. A smaller London firm had offered fair terms, and the widow representatives had questioned every charge before approval. Mrs. Price placed her signature beneath Winifred's. Mrs. Crane followed. Only then did the titled members sign. "There," Mrs. Price said, "no flowers hiding coal, and no coal hiding anyone's profit." "A most inelegant summary," Mrs. Vale said, "which is why it should be printed," Winifred replied. Laughter moved through the room, but it concealed nothing. The law had completed what the ballroom could not. Neville Mallory had been convicted after the court examined the false demand, the altered instructions, the creditor arrangement, and his attempt to obtain and destroy the score. Property from his remaining assets had been ordered toward restitution. The sum did not restore every confidence he had damaged, but it replaced the threatened allowances and repaid the duplicated charge. Harbridge and Croft had lost the proposed contract, and much of the reputation upon which their business depended. Delphine had not been prosecuted. Her part in the false appointment and audit headings had destroyed the influence she had tried to preserve. She had left London before the end of June and gone to Sussex to live with a widowed aunt. Winifred felt no pleasure in imagining her there. Delphine had mistaken attention for security and humiliation for power. The consequences were deserved. They were not entertaining. The evidence remained where law and honesty required. The red-cued score and the actual opening night program rested in separate sealed packets at Lincoln's Inn. Mrs. Vale's approved and altered proofs remained in the iron chest beneath her work table. Mr. Pritchard kept the original account book in the subscription office, where every examination was entered and witnessed. The unique silver-blue rosette lay in the committee archive inside its sealed envelope, catalogued not as insignia, but as evidence of ceremonial usurpation. Winifred's black silk fan belonged to no archive. It rested open beside the clean proof, its last silver crescent now complete. She had finished the missing curve that morning with the needle her mother had left in the fan case years before. The final stitches were not perfectly even. She had chosen to leave them so. "His Grace has been waiting outside for 20 minutes," Mrs. Vale said, without looking toward the glass partition. Nicholas stood beyond it in a dark winter coat, speaking to no one and making no attempt to enter. "He said he would wait until he was invited." Mrs. Price glanced at Winifred. "He has learned that skill unusually well for a duke." "It took practice," Winifred said. Nicholas had called at Langton House at 3 o'clock on the day after the ballroom inquiry, exactly as he had promised. He had called again 2 days later, and never without sending his card first. Through June, July, and August, he had issued no statement about their marriage. When society asked whether the Duchess would return, he replied that Her Grace would speak for herself. When newspapers praised him for exposing the fraud, he wrote to each editor and named Winifred, Mrs. Price, Mrs. Crane, Mrs. Vale, Mr. Pritchard, and the witnesses whose work had established the truth. He did not arrange a public reconciliation. He did not send jewels. He did not ask friends to persuade her. He came when invited, listened when corrected, and left when the agreed hour ended. In September, Winifred had returned to Rivington House by her own decision. Her rooms remained separate from Nicholas's until she chose otherwise. No announcement marked the change. One evening, after he asked whether she wished him to remain for tea, she told him he might remain for breakfast as well. He had understood. Since then, affection had grown through conduct rather than spectacle. He consulted before speaking in her name. He read every appendix she placed before him. When he failed, he admitted the failure before wit could disguise it. Winifred closed the fan and gave it to Mrs. Vale only long enough to fasten her glove. "Please ask His Grace to come in." Nicholas entered after Mrs. Vale opened the door. He bowed first to Winifred, then to the elected representatives, and waited until Mrs. Price offered him the corrected proof. He read every line. "Mrs. Crane's name is right," he said. "It had better be," Mrs. Crane replied. "I corrected it myself." "Then the printer has been wisely governed." "Careful, Your Grace," Mrs. Vale said. "That sounded almost like charm." Nicholas looked at Winifred. "I still possess some. I am simply learning not to use it as evidence." Winifred's smile came freely. He examined the approved contract and placed it back without adding his opinion until Mrs. Price asked for it. "The terms are fair," he said. "More importantly, the process is visible enough that no one must depend upon my assurance that they are fair." Mrs. Price nodded. "You may continue learning." When the meeting ended, Winifred collected her fan. Nicholas did not take it from her until she held it out. He opened it carefully and found the completed crescent. His thumbs stopped short of the new stitches. "You finished it this morning. May I ask why now? Because unfinished does not always mean broken. Sometimes it means the hand must be ready." He closed the fan and returned it to her. Outside, December dusk had settled over Fleet Street. Their carriage waited at the curb, its lamps glowing through a thin mist. Nicholas offered his forearm. Winifred accepted it, and they crossed the pavement together. At the carriage door, he paused. "May I take you home?" Winifred looked at him beneath the lamplight. Rivington House was no longer a place where her authority had to disappear for marriage to remain comfortable. It was not perfect, neither were they, but every room within it had begun to learn a different order. "You may come home with me," she said. Inside the carriage they sat side by side. Nicholas opened his hand between them, as he had once done at Langton House, when even comfort required permission. Winifred placed her hand in his. This time she did not wait before threading her fingers through his, and he closed his hand around hers with quiet certainty. The carriage rolled west. Nicholas lifted their joined hands and kissed her temple. Winifred leaned against his shoulder, her fan resting open across her lap, the completed crescent catching the carriage light. "I love you," he said. "Not because you forgave me, not because you came home. I love you because you are entirely yourself, and I intend never again to ask you to become smaller for my peace." Winifred turned her face toward him. "I love you too, not for the Duke you were expected to be, but for the man who learned that love must listen before it speaks." Their joined hands remained upon the open fan as the carriage carried them home.